We're here with Bob Pittman, and he's going to tell us his stories of his experiences in the United States Air Force in World War II and Korea. Would you start with, please, when did you join the Armed Services? Were you drafted? Did you enlist? And how did that all come about?
Right. I enlisted. I decided that right at the start I was going to, even on December 7th, and talking with my father, and I said, well, I'm going to enlist. I'm going to get part of it. I was 19 years old at the time. And so he said, Bob, why don't you wait just a little bit and see what happens in here and see how things go. You don't have to go. You're not draft age. And so I waited, and my girlfriend at the time, who is now my wife, she talked to me on New Year's, and when I said, well, I'm going to enlist in the spring in the Air Force as either a mechanic or a radio operator. I was always mechanical skills were natural for me, and so I thought I could fulfill that job and go to school and learn a little more about aircraft engines. And I had been interested in aviation from all the way back at the time of Lindbergh flight, and used to go to air shows in the 30s, and knew some of the pilots, and so the aviation was going to be my field when it happened. So so that was my plan, and my girlfriend talked me out of that, and so she didn't want me to go, and so the Ford Motor Company had started a building right around during the winter at Willow Run. It was going to be building bombers, and so her cousin went down in February of 1942 and got a job, and then she did. So she said, Bob, why don't you come down if you're not going in the service? I was in the publishing business, publishing magazines in Ann Arbor, Michigan at the Craft Press, and was in charge of the bindery and so defense work, we had to get involved. So I went down in March of 1942, and I was interviewed, and they gave me a job assembling B-24s. And so I worked there for up until August, and my dentist, I go back just a bit, the draft law changed in June. So now I was 20 years old in April, so now I was going to be drafted, and I had to register in June, so I had never planned on being drafted. So my dentist said to me in August, Bob, you're quite an enthusiast of aviation. Why don't you go down and take the exam for cadet, pilot, navigator, or bombardier? And I said, well, I don't really have that. I hadn't had any college prep math, and although the other subjects were good in high school, and I graduated in 1940, and I'd only been out of school a year. So in August, I went down to Detroit to the Federal Building and took the exam with about 75 other fellows about my age. And so it was very difficult. It was the equivalent of 2 years of college, and I hadn't had any college, so they started calling off those that were excused, and the group got smaller and smaller, and I was still there, and got down to 15 out of the 75. And so the next step was to be interviewed by the cadet board, who was a lieutenant colonel and two majors, and I had a little being in the marching band and drilled by a University of Michigan ROTC officer. I had a little bit of knowledge of military procedures, so here I am being interviewed by him, standing at attention, and I guess they thought I might make a good officer, because they passed me even though my math was weak. They said, Mr. Pittman, you're going to have to work on your mathematics, but we're going to accept you, and if you can pass the physical examination. So I went back in a week and took the physical and passed with flying colors. The doctor was elated. He says, I wish all of these fellows were as in good a shape as you are. And so I passed. The flight physical was a step up from, you couldn't have any dentures, your hearing had to be next to perfect, and 20/20 vision, and heart rate, pulse, and blood pressure and all that, you know.
Why were you in such good shape? What had you done?
I was a hunter fisherman and outdoors person, and we moved to the country in 39 during my junior year. My dad bought a little farm, so I was hunting on the farm, and I was an expert marksman, and they had a few guns, and did a lot of walking, exercised horses that were boarded on the farm. We didn't have any, but I would exercise their horses, and it was about a mile and a half out of town, and I had ran that back and forth a few times, you know, and school was up on campus, University of Michigan. The high school was right there, excuse me, next to the Rackham building. And so I was in good shape, and even though I wasn't playing sports, so I had to wait for my appointment as a cadet. I had passed all the physical and the excuse me, medal tests, and so because Congress makes all the appointments for cadets, and so I said, well, how long is it going to be? This is in August, and they said, oh, about November. And I said, all right. So I left my job. I was working on center wing, and I had helped assemble 32 B-24s by this time. And they had made me a foreman, and I had a group of about 15 fellas in there. And so I left my job, and I thought, well, they'll call me, right away. But their estimate was correct. They didn't.
They didn't call you till November.
They didn't call me, and I couldn't. By this time, I'm looking for something to do, and so they had a program in high school, pre-flight program, and in the physics and chemistry department, and so I went back to high school, and this one class is all I was taking in aeronautics pre-flight, and it covered the whole gamut, and many of the subjects we covered in when I went to pre-flight school later on. But I got tired of waiting, and I called up the federal building and talked to the sergeant. He said, well, if you would like to come down and enlist now, we have a program for cadets. You go to basic training, and when your appointment comes through, you just go on from there. And so I said, I'll do that. And the following 3 or 4 days later, my uncle dropped me off at the federal building, and I took the oath of office with the military and became a private in the Air Force, and there was 12 of us in the same category. And so they sent us over to Battle Creek, Fort Custer, and we got our shots, and they went through the testing again as if we were just coming as privates into the service.
Oh, geez.
And so the classification, they said, well, you passed the mechanical aptitude, and also you have some talent for Morse code, code, so you could go either. And I said, well, I'm already committed. And they said, okay, and accepted that. And so the following week, the 12 of us were sent down with some other fellas down to Jefferson Barracks, Missouri, which Jefferson Barracks had been there since General Grant's time.
Oh my goodness.
It's been there. He was there before me.
Go ahead.
Come Thanksgiving, they said, well, you're going to ship to the classification center in Nashville, Tennessee. And this is in the end of November, 1942. And so I might say at Jefferson Barracks, we had excellent housing, 2-story barracks, and they took real good care of us, and food was good, and so. But when we got to Nashville, the barracks were tar paper shacks, more or less, and it was by this time, November, it was cold, and we had, instead of a furnace that we had at Jefferson Barracks, we had a pot-bellied stove, and whoever slept closest to the stove had to take care of the fire. You had to get up and get a scuttle full of coal and bring it back in the middle of the night, and just 2 stoves on either end of the barracks, and it was a little rugged. But they put us through. I took the same test over again, but by this time I had did a little studying, and I was a little higher grade. And they had all kind of aptitude tests to determine whether you'd make a pilot, a navigator. Navigator had to have a lot of math, so that passed me over. And or bombardier. And so I qualified for either pilot or bombardier. Now most of the fellas wanted to be pilots, and I had an idea about being some, but I thought about it. What are my best talents? And I was a little tall, 6'2", to be a fighter pilot, and I didn't care about being a bomber pilot at the time. And so first choice was bombardier and second was pilot. And because being a marksman and being a mechanic or talented in mechanics and so forth, and I thought that my talent would be best in that area. So they sent me to Ellington Field, which is in south of Houston. It's where today's astronauts, it's their home, Ellington. And that was pre-flight school. And so I joined, how many others? There were about probably 300 other cadets, and it was a good base, very nice. They had very good food there, probably the best food I ever had, and because they took our subsistence allowance and gave it to mess sergeant, and he went out and bought the food, and we had steaks and so forth, and we had others. And, on Sunday morning, why, you even had eggs any style, it wasn't scrambled eggs in a pile and in your mess kit or whatever. But anyway, our facilities were very good. 3 men to a room, and I was able to pass all the subjects, and algebra, which I had very little, and to master, some differential, not too much calculus, but up into that area, quadratic equations and so forth, and trigonometry, and we had meteorology and aircraft and naval recognition and all the subjects. So once finished, they sent us to advanced training, and in my case it was Midland, Texas, and I was in class 43-9, which was the 9th class of bombardiers to graduate. So from April until June, so near the end of June, we had classes in more or less equipment, the the Norden bomb site, the Minneapolis Honeywell automatic pilot, automatic flight controls. Then we had navigation, direct reckoning navigation. We didn't have celestial navigation. The maps and charts and all the some electronics. The Honeywell autopilot had some amplifiers and so we had a little electronics, and we had to be able to master the bomb site. And as far as the Norden, and it was secret at the time when we would go to take a flight in practice bombing. We were flying in Beechcraft AT-11, this twin-engine aircraft, similar to the Mitchell bomber, but not. These had not as powerful as this, and wouldn't carry the bomb load. But
why don't you show me the picture?
Pardon?
Show me the picture. Just turn around towards me.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's good.
This is a Mitchell, and B-25, and these have 1,800 horsepower in each engine, and this is built by North American. But I was in the Beechcraft had 300 horsepower in each engine, and it basically only held. They used it for navigation and for bombing, practice bombing. They was basically a six-passenger, and it would hold. In our case, it would hold. What was it, 1,000 pounds of practice bombs. They were sand-filled bombs with a 100-pound with a black powder charge in the back of it, and the charge would go off when it hit. And the two cadets rode in, one in the nose and one in the back, and one would do the practice bombing and the other would photograph. But we had to, I was going to say it was secret, the sight head, which was the mechanism for computing, mechanically computing the ground speed and the range and the tangent of the dropping angle, and it did it mechanically. And but this was all secret, so we had to go to a vault, and one of us had to carry a .45 pistol, and the two of us would carry the sight head out the aircraft. We would put it in and pre-flight it, and then when we were through practice bombing, each of us dropped 5 bombs in practice on a flight, and we would take the camera and the sight head back to the vault and turn it back in, and
when you dropped the bombs, where were you? Was this in the Middleton, Texas area? Was it out in
it
the
was
desert?
out in West Texas,
West
in
Texas.
Midland, just outside of Midland,
Okay.
about 20 miles. And then the ranges, they had about 5 different ranges, and there was 2 flights in the morning, usually 5 aircraft 4 or 5 in a flight, and you would get in a pattern, and you were dropping bombs and going around at different targets. And we either bombed from 4,000 feet, we started out 4,000, or 11,000. With 11,000, we had to wear an oxygen mask. We had oxygen. And then near the end of the training, we had some low altitude, 1,000 foot dropping, which was quite interesting because of your relationship to the speed and the ground and so forth. Quite different.
Which was the greater challenge of the three?
The higher the altitude,
The
and then you run into winds that are different at altitude. You could have one wind at one direction where you took off from the air base, and you get up, and winds aloft might be 180 degrees different, and so you had a challenge. With the sight, you're trying to make the crosshairs stand still on the target by adjusting a course knob, which was on one side, and a rate knob, which adjusted the rate of fore and aft travel. The other one was drift. You had to get the aircraft to point into the wind to keep from drifting off the side, so that the attitude may be different than your track on the ground, but once what we called, you killed the drift, so that there was no drift. And then you had to level, ask the pilot for a level. You had a gyro, a horizontal gyro, and you had to adjust the bubbles like on so that once it was level, so that you had a perfect plane with the ground. So that was the idea. And the target was a 100-foot circle. It had a bullseye, and it was a shack about 20-foot square. And the idea was to get it inside the circle. Well, after dropping through my training, and I ended up with a circular air through the 1,000, 4,000, and 11,000. I had a 230-foot circular air, which was from the bullseye out. The average was 230 feet, which...
That's pretty good, I think.
Yeah.
It seems like that's not very far from the bullseye.
That's 230 feet. A bomb 230 feet away, you know. But anyway, you had to, I think the minimum was to graduate, I think you had to have about no more than 300 foot. But so when I was going to graduate, I became an upperclassman, and and also they made me the cadet flight lieutenant. 40 fellas in the barracks in Plate D, which I was in. Each barracks, there was 4 barracks in A, B, C, and D flight, and there was about, in our class, there was about 40 in each barracks. And I was the flight lieutenant, had to get them out in the morning and march them to chow, to breakfast and so forth, and march them to class, so I was a cadet flight lieutenant, and we had the head cadets. It was similar to West Point, and only in a smaller. But yeah, we had they would inspect the bottom of your shoes, and every day they would inspect the barracks and see that every button on your clothes hanging up in the area was buttoned, and in the bed you could drop a quarter and it would bounce and so forth. It was, so anyway, it was
Very military.
we learned you're going to be an officer, and
Yeah.
so we learned a little military discipline. So
Well, then when you were done with your training, where did they send you?
well, I was going to say, when I became a class upperclassman, I called my girlfriend up. I was engaged to back here in Michigan, and I said, "Come on down, let's get married."
Wow.
So on the 5th of June, 1943, Mary Elizabeth Brady came down to Midland all by herself. And young women didn't travel by themselves by train in those days. It was, but the conductor on the train, on the car she was, the Pullman she was on, kind of fathered her a little bit.
Sounds like she was adventuresome anyway, because she worked at
Well,
Charlevoix.
it was an adventure for her anyway. So 3 weeks later I graduated and became a second lieutenant, and she pinned my wings on, besides being a new, having a bridegroom and so forth. So our orders read that we would be given a delay en route. We didn't have to report, only it was about almost 10 days. So to Davis Mountain, Tucson, Arizona, to the base they had, and that base they had B-24s. But we went home and then all the way back to Michigan, and then we went back to Tucson, and we got down to Tucson on a Saturday, and I reported in, and my wife was staying at the Del Rio Hotel there in Tucson, and they said, "Don't unpack. We're going to send you up to Lowry Field up at Denver, Colorado." So we didn't unpack. I got a ticket on Monday morning, and so she went up on the same train that we went up to Lowry Field, and I went into a remote control gunnery school for B-29s, and they were going to make us gunnery officers. On the B-29, the cabin was pressurized, where the crew worked, but the bomb bay area was unpressurized. And there's a tube going across the top of the bomb bay, and you get in, and there was a little cart that you could lay on, and you pull yourself through this tube to get from the rear of the aircraft to the front. So the turrets were in non-pressurized area, and they were all remote controlled. So the sight was in the pressurized area, and you could turn the sight, whether in the nose or on the side or in the tail, and the turrets would respond and point, and so you're learning the system. And so I'm now learning electronics and a little more armament and so forth. Halfway through the course, they decided, no, we don't need, we need these bombardiers. They must have, over in Europe, they must have been the casualty rate was getting pretty high in the 8th Air Force, so and they weren't quite ready to, in 1943, they were going to move these 29s out. In fact, while we were there, the first 6 came down to Salina, Kansas, and we flew down in some B-18s and looked at them, and they were bigger than any aircraft we had seen, 104